So we had the HMIC report, as we know, in a number of cases, highly critical, generally pretty critical. There were lots of reasons behind that. There was obviously talk about resourcing. There's talk about getting the basics right. The basics always feel quite complicated to me, but that's why I'm not a police officer and you are. And then something about leadership and culture, and it's on the leadership and culture bit that I want to pause a bit today, because the reason I chose for the title of my talk, Turning Action into Results, is there is no shortage of action. There is so much action, we are drowning in action. There are about 92 task and finish groups that have been set up post-HMIC. There are more action plans whizzing around than you can imagine. And actually, when you analyse the police response to domestic abuse, there is a ton of activity, and that's highlighted in Sylvia's figures about how much it's costing the criminal justice system. But what we want is to shift those numbers that Sylvia showed us, and really for that to translate into results. Can I just grab some water? Sorry.
Let me do it for you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to look. They trust me so much for the technology, we've got one button. So if I click it forward twice, we're in big trouble. And I can't make it work. What do I do? There, okay. So 3 things. Okay, lovely, thank you. 3 things to make a difference. One is about managing risk. One is about independent scrutiny. And one I'll come on to is about having one face as an organisation. So, okay, I will be on home territory just for a moment. Our approach to managing risk has changed very dramatically. And in the audience somewhere is Jan Pickles, who is now Assistant PCC in South Wales. I don't know where she's hiding. Oh, she's just there. Who was really the person who I met many moons ago in a restaurant in Cardiff Bay when we talked about rolling out the model that she and colleagues had developed in Cardiff to managing the highest risk cases of domestic abuse. And in 2004-05, when that started, there were about 200 or 300 cases a year. There are now 65,000 adults and 85,000 children whose cases go to Marek. So if you adjust for repeat victimisation, which we try and count consistently, Sylvia, but not always brilliantly, but we do count the absolute numbers consistently, I promise you. Many in the room help us do that. It's about 50,000 people. And the thing that's very important about this is that 40% of those referrals are non-criminal justice. So to go to Roger's point about harm as opposed to a crime, what we want is midwives to spot harm. We want health visitors to spot harm. We want housing officers to spot harm and risk. And this data would absolutely underline what you were saying, Sylvia, about multiple incidents. So when we look at the cases going to Marek, and you will all know that, these are cases where you as police have been out endless times. And similarly, in terms of gender split, I think it's even more weighted towards women, with well over 90% of cases going to Marek being women. Okay, I just couldn't resist this. Some people bring data, I bring a mouse. So the thing about managing risk, so, you know, going back to what are our 3 things that we need to get right, I think we have made a lot of progress about understanding what risk looks like, both within the police service and outside the police service. And obviously, you know, there's physical violence, which we tend to be a bit better at spotting. There's stalking, which we're getting slightly less bad at spotting. And then the more subtle forms of control are really hard to spot. I think particularly hard if you're a police officer turning up to a 999. I think they need the quality of relationship that the independent support from women's organisations and other specialist support organisations will encourage that level of disclosure. And then there's obviously the risk related to alcohol misuse, mental health issues, and others. And we would argue strongly that that risk management is best done in a multi-agency setting because the safety plan that we need to put in place for victim, perpetrator and child, so risk management plan for the perpetrator and safety plan for victim and child, needs to be coordinated and needs to reflect the broadest understanding of what's going on. But we've just done a bit of work looking at about 150 cases that went to Marek, and we've tracked every single incident, police, health, children's services, specialist support services, probation, anybody who was prepared to give us their data. We literally, when I say we, it obviously wasn't me, because clearly I wouldn't have had the attention span to follow it through. But what we found was that nearly all that activity, and coming back to this theme of there is a lot of action, there is a lot of action. In one place, 60 perpetrators, 500 police call-outs pre-Marek. So we are going in a reactive fashion. You don't need me to tell you this. We're going in a reactive fashion again and again and again and responding to single incidents. And I think my call really is that somewhere we have to take the very good practice that happens, for example, in certain integrated offender management, where we talk about a risk management plan for perpetrators rather than reacting to an incident. And it was interesting looking at the money in these cases. Over 60% is spent on reacting to perpetrators. It was about nearly £750,000, just straight direct costs, no emotional costs, no economic costs, nothing, just straight public services. Over 60% spent on the perpetrator, 30% on the children, and 6% on the victim. So that says it all. But the money we're spending and the activity we're spending on the perpetrator, the vast bulk of it feels reactive. And it just feels like we need to get on the front foot and be planning the risk management, not on your own as police, but also crucially in partnership with your health colleagues, because last time I looked, managing alcohol and substance use and mental health issues is not in your training program. It might need to be from a health perspective. And I think this is also, so, you know, Roger raised some really good points about why this is hard to deal with, but I just want to make the kind of human point, which is, as an officer, I just imagine if you go endlessly to the same house and you don't get a result, that doesn't feel great, and that is incredibly demotivating, any of the things that we can think in our own lives. So I just think that there's something where strategically we need to get on the front foot and recognise that high-risk domestic abuse is a volume issue. It's very convenient to have your 10 top problem profile or whatever you call them in your secret police language, but actually we're talking about a big volume, and that's where I respect those who say let's look at the homicides, but actually you sit at Marek, most of those cases are potential homicides. Actually, I think it's a miracle there aren't more. And so we need to be acknowledging this is volume harm that's happening, and we need to get on the front foot and manage it, not as a tiny critical few, which suits us, but as the human reality of what's going on. So the second thing, I think, is independent scrutiny, and that's meant to be a little Carder sparrow in the crocodile's mouth. So we had independent scrutiny, obviously, from HMIC. We get independent scrutiny from things like the films that have been referred to, but I think that we need regular independent scrutiny of how operations are running in terms of responding to domestic abuse. My limited understanding of the police service, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it is incredibly difficult when your chief officer says that action plan that we put together post-HMIC, is it implemented? Yes, sir, yes, ma'am. Is it working? Yes, sir, yes, ma'am. Quite hard to say, no, it's not working. And actually, you probably aren't even given time to find out whether it's working or not. One of the things that we're doing at the moment is working with a number of forces to take the recommendations, the action plan, and then to dip sample cases and see whether the action plan is actually making a difference in people's lives. That doesn't have to be a big, burdensome, bureaucratic process. Scarily, you only need to pull a few cases to know whether it's working or not. And it throws up some pretty shocking, both practical and structural issues. For example, needing to check 5 different databases to find out all of the information that you might need for a case. So in one situation, I think officers looking for several days to arrest a guy who all the time was in police custody but on a different database. So just bringing those things out, it's just easier to say as an independent person, I think, than it is from inside the force. And then the final thing, and I thought Roger was going to say this, and then he went off in a different direction, so because I thought maybe I wasn't quite sure where it was going, is this concept of having one face. So when you said, Roger, you spoke to a woman who happened to be a police officer, I don't think there's any happened about it. Our working assumption is that there is as much domestic abuse amongst those of you employed within the police service as there is in the general population. And when she said she could think of 7 people, I thought you were going to say she could think of 7 colleagues instantly. They were, okay. They were friends as well as colleagues. Okay, that's a radical concept. And the analogy I make is, with another hat on, I'm a trustee of Comic Relief, and some of you will remember that there was a Panorama programme about our investment policy. So we raised a lot of money on Red Nose Day and Sport Relief. Thank you to all of you who wear red noses and run the mile. And our investment strategy was to maximise returns so that we could give the most away to the charities that we support around the country. About 1% of our investment portfolio, she says defensively, was invested in arms companies, BAE Systems and others. And we had a very helpful talk from another grant-making trust who'd also looked at this and said, we've decided we have to have an ethical investment policy because as a grant maker, you have to operate with one face. You can't be credible trying to save the world with one hand and then with the other hand, doing whatever it takes to make the most money. And I think that there's something that needs to be thought about all looking like John Malkovich, apparently, about having one face as the police service. So I think that a real challenge to the leaders, and I personally think the thing that would finally turn the culture would be if domestic abuse within the force was dealt with properly. So the feedback from colleagues who were peer inspectors on the HMIC inspection was that in every force, everybody knew who the victims were and everybody knew who the perpetrators were, but nothing happened about it. So as chief officers, you're expecting your colleagues to behave one way inside the organisation and then another way when they go out and deal with domestic abuse in the community. And whenever I said this in HMIC meetings, everyone looked at the floor, which either means I'm barking or I'm onto something that's quite important. I think personally it's really important. I think the organisations need to be like a stick of rock, not just the police, every organisation. But the police is a particular challenge because how can you expect your peers and colleagues to operate one way when they know that the person sitting next to them is a perpetrator, or often the person sitting above them is a perpetrator and nothing's being done about it. So I think that's an incredibly important message. Everyone tells me it's very hard to do, by the way, but hey, we have to give it a crack, I think. So why do we care about this? It's about getting it right first time. Everybody in this room wants to get it right first time, and all the data suggests that we really don't get it right first time, whether we're in the voluntary sector, whether we're in the police service. All of us could do this better, and I think that there are 3 drivers of why we need to get it right first time. One is obviously the money. I don't think it's the most important one. That's why I want to get it out of the way. I agree absolutely with the moral imperative, but we are spending a lot of money, and I would argue we could spend it much more smartly. I think the second reason is the point I was trying to make earlier about just how hard police officers are working, reacting to domestic abuse. And I think that we need to get it right first time so that officers can work hard to get in ahead of repeat victimisation and to be managing risk in a much more proactive way. And then obviously, by far the most importantly, we need to get it right first time for the human impact to both victims and children, as we all know. Thank you.